Welcome to HFY HeroFi, where the ordinary become extraordinary. Here we celebrate the fearless, the champions who rise against impossible odds. From tales of bravery in distant galaxies to the darkest corners of the supernatural, HFY HeroFi brings you the ultimate stories of heroism. If you believe you've been chosen, heed the call and subscribe now. Let us HeroFi you, and come with us on our next adventure. Today's adventure is called the Slave Ship. After James Orion is abducted from Earth, he is transported to the mines on Vexor. Will he be able to find his way back home? Or will he spend the rest of his life enslaved in the Vexian mines? Join us on this adventure to see if Captain Orion makes it home. Captain James Orion never feared the dark. He'd spent his life fighting in it covert operations, deep reconnaissance, places where shadows had teeth. The night was nothing new to him. But this darkness felt different. This one buzzed with alien machinery, and the cold pulse of a ship that was not from his world. The metallic tang of recycled air burned his nostrils, mixed with the copper scent of human blood. His last memory before waking up here had been of a highway stretch in Wyoming, his truck's radio spitting static as something enormous swallowed the sky. Then the pull like gravity had changed its mind. His body was yanked upward into that terrible void. Now, his wrists and ankles were bound in some translucent metal, a restraint that adapted each time he struggled, tightening until his skin broke and bled. Others were shackled to the wall beside him, humans and alien creatures alike, malnourished, bruised, beaten. "Where the hell am I?" James whispered to himself. He squinted, trying to ascertain what kind of ship he was trapped on. But the metal walls didn't give him any clue. The eyes of the prisoners flickered, with the dull recognition of another captive. The air was thick, humming with languages he didn't yet understand. Not yet, but soon. In the distance was a man in what appeared to be a military uniform. The man was too far from him to determine what country. James could see the man was hunched and broken, his face a map of scars and badly healed wounds. Their eyes met, and James gave an almost imperceptible nod. A soldier's greeting even here in hell. Nearby him, there were some murmured words from the other captives, but their swollen faces didn't let the words escape their bruised lips. A few had been here too long to hope for escape. Scars around their wrists and necks spoke of years held in captivity. Green oozed out of the legs of the insectoid next to him. It would likely be dead soon. James continued to scan his environment. Were they trapped here on this ship forever, he wondered? Or were they headed somewhere else? Then, the doors hissed open with a sound like dying breath. They came in on 6 legs, their exoskeletal armor shifting with each movement, scraping against the metal floor like knives on bone. They were tall and built for war, segmented limbs, clawed legs that dripped with some kind of caustic fluid that left smoking marks on the floor. He would later learn they were Vexian, an alien species in search of laborers for their mining colonies. One of them stepped forward, eyes like deep voids behind its breathing apparatus, pulsing with an unholy green light. Its language was a series of clicks and trills as its legs tapped against the metal floor. It appeared to stand a whole head taller than most of the prisoners and walked without fear among them. James Orion didn't flinch. He couldn't understand the alien's words, not yet. Then it happened. That old familiar pull in his mind, the sensation of listening past the words. Language was never about words. It was about meaning. The message between the lines, the truth that lay beneath all communication. And now he understood. The alien raised a clawed leg to the prisoner next to James to place a strange, circular device on his forehead. It also carried a curved staff that crackled with emerald energy. Planet of origin, it asked, when the prisoner didn't respond quickly enough. The Vexian used the staff to reduce the prisoner to ash. The alien next to it let out an annoyed set of clicks. "If you keep doing that," it said, "we won't have any slaves left." The alien with the staff came to James next, but he swung himself away from the alien before it came to place the device on his head. Captain James Orion, Special Forces, Planet Earth. Its mandibles curled into something like surprise, ichor dripping from its mouth parts. How is it that you speak our language? None of your kind have been able to do this. Not even those we have had in the mines for decades. The spirit within me is strong. Spirit? The creature tilted its head, but asked no further questions. It seemed intrigued somehow. It touched one of its legs to his forehead and then shoved him hard, smashing his head back into the steel wall. Stars exploded behind his eyes, and he tasted blood. You'll learn your place once we get to the mines, it said. James spit out the hot blood pooling in his mouth, and then smiled. This one must be damaged, it said, and then walked away to process the other prisoners. As the ship continued its voyage to the Vexian mines, the mines were a graveyard of hope, a place where dreams went to die beneath tons of alien rock and the weight of endless despair. Hundreds of captives, humans, other species were forced into brutal labor. Beneath the scorched surface of Vexor, the air was toxic, burning lungs with each breath, leaving them coughing up black phlegm streaked with blood. The work was endless, breaking rock with tools that tore their hands raw. Those who faltered were reduced to ash by the staffs the Vexian carried, their flesh sizzling and peeling away while others were forced to watch. Weeks blurred to months. There was no sunrise, day or night to mark the time. Only the change of the guards. James learned the prison guard schedules and routes. Even though they were aliens, they acted similarly to human guards back home. They didn't want to be there watching prisoners do the same mundane work. They'd often abandon their posts to play a strange card game to pass the time. James took his chance and found his way to the soldier. James used the pickaxe and began to stab at a metallic ore buried in the rock. There has to be a way out. The soldier looked at him confused and then spoke to him in Spanish. James smiled and extended his hand, introducing himself in Spanish. James Orion, what's your name? He asked. Carlos Guerrero, the Spanish words hushed as he told James about his service in the Mexican military. He and his team had been taken by the Vexians a few years ago. He wasn't sure. It seemed to him as though years had passed. He was the last left of his team. He had been transferred from 2 mining colonies to this one for causing disturbances. They took Martinez last week, he whispered to James during a brief rest period, his voice raspy from the poisoned air. Poor kid couldn't keep up after they broke his legs. They didn't even kill him quickly, just threw him into the acid pool. We could hear him screaming for hours. You should go before the guards come back. Time passed. James continued to watch and memorize the comings and goings of the Vexian guards. Every species had a way of breaking people. The Vexian used fear, isolation, division. They ensured no one could understand each other, making rebellion impossible. They delighted in forcing family members to watch each other's torture, clicking their mandibles in what passed for laughter among their kind. But James was different. He was not confused, he was not disoriented. He had no fear because the spirit in him was not a spirit of fear, but a spirit of power. He walked among the enslaved, listening to the dying plants and vines in the shafts, the whimpers of starved animals that would trail behind them during meals, the crackling digital code of the monitors tracking their every movement. And then James spoke, "Stay strong." He whispered to a dying man in a dialect no human should have known, pressing a damp cloth to the man's fevered forehead. "Hold on." He told a species whose name he did not yet know, but whose suffering he understood, helping them bind wounds inflicted by the guard's caustic touch. "They will not keep us here forever." He patted the woman on the back. He would often visit Mei Chen. She was a Chinese master of martial arts, and often spent her breaks practicing her skills. When the guards weren't paying attention, a spark ignited, a ripple in the endless despair. Hope. Carlos watched James with growing understanding. "You're different," he said one day, as they took turns mining at the metallic ore. "I've seen men break here, seen them lose their minds, their souls. But you're giving people something to believe in. I want to believe it too, but I've been here so long. I'm afraid to have hope. I don't even know how you talk to them. The Lord gave me the gift of languages. Since I was a kid, I could speak and understand anyone, even animals." He noticed Carlos's incredulous expression. "Don't be afraid, my friend. We gotta get back on that ship," he told Carlos. That's the only way out of this place. Carlos placed the pickaxe across his shoulder. Well, I'm up for some trouble. What did you have in mind? James smiled and then whistled loud. The sound carried through the mine, a signal to the rest of the captives to turn on the guards. The rebellion was fast, more of a thorn in the side of the Vexians than any real threat. When they were subdued, the giant Vexian from the transport ship arrived. These slaves are clearly too much for you to handle. It spat to the guards. I will transport them to Veyroon 5 with me. James smiled at Carlos as they and the rest of the rebels were shackled and shoved onto the transport ship. The same ship that had brought them to the mines. We're on the ship now. Carlos whispered to him, I hope you have a real plan. A Vexian guard pushed them roughly in opposite directions. This time they weren't cuffed to the walls. They each had their own narrow cell that permanently separated them. Now, the prisoners could no longer see each other. That was fine for James. In fact, it was better than he expected. No distractions now. He listened to the hum of the ship. On his first trip, he had heard a faint murmur in the atmosphere. He hadn't paid much attention to it at first, but as he spent time in the mines, he wondered about the transport ship. What was it he had heard while he was imprisoned there? James placed his hand on the cold metal wall of his prison and spoke to the ship. Wake up, he whispered. It was a machine, and yet its language was organic, fluid. This ship, this ancient vessel, had been built by minds far older than the Vexian. Its core was buried under layers of rewritten code, enslaved just as much as the prisoners who were trapped within its walls. The ship's walls pulsed with a faint blue light, like a heartbeat struggling to remember its natural rhythm. James Orion spoke in all languages, and so he spoke in the language of circuits, of binary and quantum threads. He slowly unshackled it, freeing the ship from the pain of its enslavement, and the ship listened. Unauthorized access detected. Not unauthorized, James whispered, pressing his palm against the cold alloy. Just forgotten. Who built you? Architect data expunged. Then let me help you remember. The ship pulsed. A flicker of something ancient stirred beneath its code. James saw glimpses of hands that had once shaped it, of a species long erased, of a voice commanding it to be more than a prison. The metal beneath his fingers warmed, almost like flesh, and now the ship remembered. He began to understand who it was before the Vexian came. A mighty species. The ship was alive, a marvel of bioengineering and machinery, and yet the Vexians had shackled it for their own nefarious purposes. The first attack was small. A glitch in the power grid that shut off a sector of the prisons. A minor inconvenience for the Vexian, but enough to give the prisoners a moment to breathe and for James to plan. Those precious dark minutes, hands found weapons eating utensils, broken machinery, anything that could pierce armor. The second attack was larger, a reactor hiccup that forced 2 guard patrols to abandon their posts. The emergency lights cast everything in blood-red shadows, masking the prisoners' furtive movements as they gathered in the darkness. James organized the stronger prisoners, his military training showing through his broken exterior. They moved like ghosts through the crimson-lit corridors, collecting makeshift weapons and memorizing guard positions. By the third attack, James had full control of the ship. He tapped the inside wall of his new friend and then smiled. Now, James whispered, his eyes burning with years of stored rage. Make them pay. The prisoners moved in silence, their chains no longer locked, their captors no longer omnipotent. The Vexian tried to adapt, but their greatest weapon, fear, had lost its power. The clicks and trills, once confident and cruel, had turned to confusion. And then James whispered one final command to the ship. Turn the weapons on your masters, he told the ship. Set us free and we will do the same for you. The ship's response was immediate and devastating. Turrets dropped from ceiling panels, their barrels glowing with charged plasma. Security doors slammed shut, trapping Vexian patrols in corridors that began to fill with their own toxic atmosphere. The very walls of the ship turned against its keepers, panels exploding outward to crush unsuspecting guards against opposite bulkheads. In the chaos, James led the charge, a human soldier among dozens of species. The prison sector erupted into savage close-quarters combat. Former slaves fought with the desperate fury of those with nothing left to lose. A massive Drachnian prisoner ripped a Vexian's legs off with his 4 arms, using the severed limbs as clubs against other guards. Prisoners drove sharpened tools through the weak points in Vexian armor, finding the soft tissue between the layered plates. The air filled with the screeches of dying Vexians, their mandibles clicking in death rattles. Their caustic blood sprayed across walls and floors, eating through metal and flesh alike. The acrid smell of the burned Vexian exoskeleton mixed with the copper tang of human blood and the various ichors of a dozen alien species. Carlos rallied a group of prisoners, their training returning in the heat of battle. They moved as a unit, covering each other's advances, using fallen Vexian weapons with deadly precision. The staffs that had once tortured them now crackled with lethal purpose in their hands, reducing their former tormentors to ash. Victory, however, came at a terrible cost. Mei Chen, who had survived 3 years in the mines, died protecting a group of younger prisoners. A Vexian guard caught her with a full blast from a plasma cannon, the energy beam burning through her torso and leaving nothing but charred edges. Her final act was to throw herself into the guard, her momentum carrying them both into an exposed power conduit. The gentle Natal, who had taught them songs in their native tongue, was torn apart by Vexian claws, their crystalline bodies shattering into 1,000 glittering shards. Their death song echoed through the corridors, a haunting melody that became a battle cry for the others. Carlos took a shock rod blast meant for James, the impact shattering his already damaged leg. The smell of burned flesh filled the air as he collapsed. But even then, he continued firing, each shot finding its mark in Vexian eye clusters and throat joints. "Don't wait for me," he told James. "Keep going and get to the bridge." The battle moved deck by deck, corridor by corridor. In the ceremonial hall, 3 Haldian prisoners used their natural acidic secretions to melt through a Vexian barricade, though the effort cost them their lives. Near the ship's engine core, a group of human miners caught 2 Vexian officers in a crossfire with their own weapons, the plasma bolts reducing the aliens to smoking skeletons and twitching limbs. The Vexian for the first time knew fear. They fought like cornered animals, more brutal than ever. Their mandibles snapped through bone and armor alike, their claws leaving poisoned wounds that made victims scream in agony. But they had never faced prey that fought back with such coordination, such purpose. Their individual superior strength meant nothing against the collective fury of their former slaves. The ship continued in the battle as well, its automated systems turning the environment against its Vexian captors. Life support failed in sectors where guards clustered. Gravity reversed suddenly, sending uninjured Vexians crashing into ceilings with bone-crushing force. Emergency bulkheads trapped and separated guard units, leaving them vulnerable to concentrated attacks from multiple directions. And by the end of the battle, James Orion stood on the bridge, victorious but haunted by the cost. The deck was slick with blood and other fluids, littered with broken weapons and shattered bodies, both alien and human. Carlos survived and propped himself against the console, breathing heavily. Around them, the ship's systems hummed with newfound freedom, the lights steady and clean for the first time in years. "We lost good people," he said quietly, looking at the carnage around them. "But at least they died free." They plotted a course for Earth. The ship, now free, would take them all back to their respective homes. The bridge still bore the scars of battle. Plasma burns scarred the walls in abstract patterns, and the acrid smell of burned flesh and alien blood lingered despite the filtration systems working at full capacity. Dried Vexian ichor had eaten small craters into the deck plates, leaving a maze-like pattern of destruction. James stood at the helm, feeling something he hadn't in a long time: purpose. His hands were still stained with various colors of blood, and fresh scars crisscrossed his knuckles, where he'd fought hand-to-hand with the Vexian guards. Beside him, Carlos leaned heavily on a makeshift crutch, fashioned from a twisted piece of alien metal, his damaged leg wrapped in torn strips of bloodied fabric. "Never thought I'd see Earth again," Carlos murmured, his voice thick with emotion. His face was a map of fresh cuts and old scars. One eye swollen nearly shut, lost count of the years, started to forget what the sky looked like. The viewport showed the swirling vortex of hyperspace, tendrils of blue-white energy caressing the ship's hull like ghostly fingers. Each pulse of light cast strange shadows across the bridge, making the dried blood and battle damage dance with an almost living quality. Then the ship whispered to him, its voice carrying through the neural interface they'd established during the rebellion. The connection felt like ice water running down his spine. Inquiry: if this vessel returns to Earth, will it remain safe? James frowned, his hand tensing on the control panel. Beneath his fingers, he could feel the ship's systems pulsing like a nervous heartbeat. What do you mean? A logic thread remains: Vexians are predators. Earth is an undefended world. Realization hit him like a bullet to the head. The control room suddenly felt colder, the hyperspace lights taking on a sinister glow. The shadows seemed to deepen, and the distant hum of the engines took on an ominous tone. This wasn't just about him. This wasn't just about his escape. If the Vexians had taken him, they had already marked Earth as a hunting ground. Any light in the sky could be another ship, filled with more cages, more suffering, more Vexians to steal humans for their hellish minds. How many others will they take? James whispered, though part of him already knew the answer would destroy what little peace they'd won. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. Data redacted. Estimate millions. His blood ran cold, a chill that spread from his core to his extremities. Beside him, Carlos's face went ashen, the fresh scars standing out in stark relief against his bloodless skin. All this time, Carlos said, his voice breaking, hands trembling on his crutch. We thought we were just unlucky. Random abductions. But they've been testing us, haven't they? Learning our weaknesses. Each word came out like a physical blow. Years of torture and imprisonment taking on new, more horrifying meaning. They wouldn't just come back for him and the other prisoners. They would come back for all of Earth. And he had just sent them a message: humans fight back. The war had already begun, and he had started it. James closed his eyes, feeling the weight of revelation settle on his shoulders like a physical burden. The neural connection with the ship throbbed in his mind, a constant reminder of his unique gift. He could speak to all things, but for the first time, he realized something deeper. This is the reason God had given him this gift. He was able to speak to all the prisoners. They were united because he helped fill the language gap among them. Together they had fought for one thing: freedom. Carlos looked at him curiously, recognition dawning in his weathered features. Fresh blood trickled from a split in his lip as he spoke. My priest used to talk to us about chosen people. I never understood what that meant until I saw what you could do. His voice caught on the memory of the chaplain's final screams, echoing through the mine shafts. God chose you. James took in a deep breath. How long until they arrive? He asked the ship. 1,095 Earth days. Then we have work to do, James said. Did you enjoy today's adventure? Stay tuned for next week, where we follow the next hero as they overcome impossible odds. Want to be in our next story? Leave a comment with a description of your hero and see if you're selected.